get
This
started.
conference will now be recorded.
All right. So just to recap, in yesterday's class, we were talking about a couple of things like we were first doing what is the introduction of Dockers and why do we need something called as containerization. So containerization of applications out here. And then we went ahead and we understood what is a Docker image, or rather, we firstly went ahead and installed Dockers on a VM, which is, let's say, running on Ubuntu, let's say, operating system. And then we understood what is a Docker image. So Docker image. And then we went ahead and we understood what is a Docker container and how do you create a Docker container. Docker containers. And finally, we understood how do you expose a Docker container to the internet and how do you access it. Expose the container and access it. This is something that I'll go down into more. So again, I have my virtual machine that is running in the background. And if I want to see the images that are, let's say, inside this machine, I'd say sudo docker images. This is the command. And as and when I run this command, I have an image called Nginx, which is the latest version. I downloaded this yesterday. It was created by someone 2 weeks ago. And if I want to see the containers that are running in the background, I'll say sudo docker container ls, or I can also say sudo docker ps. Anything is okay. So sudo docker container ls or sudo docker ps will give me what are all the containers that are running in the background. So if I say sudo docker ps-a, meaning all the containers that existed and that were, let's say, running in the background, it will give me a list of all these containers. Let's say I want to delete these containers. I don't want these containers. I want to create something fresh. I want to start from scratch. I can say sudo docker rm remove, and then I'll go ahead and copy the ID of each and every container. So this is the ID of the first container. I'll do a space. ID of the second container, do a space. ID of the third container, do a sorry. ID of the third container, do a space, and then enter. So it tells, okay, fine, all these containers are deleted. And if you again run this command called sudo docker psfna, you don't have any containers that are running in the background. You do not even have any containers out here. And if you if you want to delete an image, so for example, if I have an image here called sudo docker images, I want to delete this image, I'll simply go ahead and write a command called sudo docker rmi remove image rmi is the name of the image. So it's telling, okay, fine, deleted this one, deleted the particular image, untagged, and it also deleted this out. So now if you see, if I do a sudo docker images, I do not have an image in this particular system, and all the images and all the containers are completely deleted out here as such. So I'm starting again all the way from the scratch again. These are the commands that I've been using, guys. So again, let's go into the commands. These are important. The commands are important to understand how it is going around. So if I go into, let's say, Docker, I have this particular, let's say, folder inside which I have something called Docker commands. Again, I'll just share this link to you all so that you can bookmark the same. Paste this link here. Please bookmark the same out here. I've tried to consolidate all the commands that we've been using in here. So let's do once again. Let's go ahead and firstly let's pull the image. I'll say sudo docker pull nginx, the latest version of nginx. So I'll say colon latest. So I'm firstly pulling that particular image from something called as a Docker Hub repository. Again, I'm just going ahead and telling the image name. I never mentioned the repository name. You'll just go ahead and, let's say, pull that particular image by default from the Docker Hub from the Docker Hub registry out here. And now if I do a sudo docker images, I have the Nginx latest image, the ID of this particular image created 2 weeks ago, and etc. And now if I want to run this image in the background, I'll say sudo docker run. So this is the command called sudo docker run. And once I give this particular command, I'll say hyphen hyphen name of the container that I want to run. I'll say test container, and then hyphen d in the background. In the background, I want to run this out. In a detached mode, I want to run this out. Hyphen p. This probably is something that I haven't really gone into in deep. I did not really explain how this really works out. Let's do this. I'll say hyphen p 80 colon 80 space the name of the image. So Nginx. So I'll just enter this out and the container is started. So what I just did is that when I am going ahead and running a container, I'm running a container on top of my host, right? So this is my host on which Docker is actually installed, and the host is nothing but a virtual machine here. And on top of this particular host, I have a Docker software that is installed, and on top of that particular Docker software, I have a container that is running. Let's see more results. I have a container that is running, and inside the container, I have an Nginx image, or I have the Nginx HTML pages out here. So there is a simple HTML page which is telling that, okay, fine, this is the Nginx server. And if you want to look at this particular HTML page from the internet, the only thing that I have is the public IP of the virtual machine. So this is the public IP of the virtual machine. This is the only thing that I do have right now. So I, as a user, if this is the deal, if I will go to the public IP of this machine, meaning if I want to talk to this machine over the internet, what I'm normally doing is that I'm using the public IP of this particular machine and talking over a port number called 80. So whatever is the public IP over a port number called 80, which is nothing but the HTTP traffic. From the internet, I'm sending across a HTTP request into this particular public IP. And now what I want to do is I want to tell that whenever someone hits this public IP at port 80, meaning at the internet traffic, this host should communicate to the Docker that yes, I have someone requesting me at port number 80. Where should I divert it? This Docker will tell, okay, fine, you know what, you have a container that is running in the background, and this container also has a port 80. Internally, this container also has a port 80. Please divert the traffic there so that you get this content to this host and back to the user. So that hyphen p in your Docker command, right? The first 80 represents the host port. The second 80 represents the port of the container. So it is always the host port versus the container port. And each and every container is having its own, let's say, code, having its own image and so on and so forth out here. That is what port exposure, or that's what exposing a container really means. And if you see this, this is the entire command. So if you look at this, it is docker run the name hyphen hyphen the name of the container hyphen d detach mode hyphen p host port versus the container port space the name of the image that you have downloaded out here as such. So this is what we have done by using this particular command, which is called sudo. I added something called sudo because I wanted to run this as a root user. Then I said docker run hyphen hyphen the name of the container hyphen d hyphen p the host port, which is port 80 of the virtual machine. And if 80 of the, I mean, if you get a traffic at 80 of the virtual machine, where do you want to divert it? Is to, let's say, the container port at port 80 out here. And as and when I do that, if I take this IP address and if I copy this and paste this out, I have something called welcome to Nginx page that is running over the internet. So you can just take this IP address and you can try it on your browser also. It will still work. You will get something called welcome to Nginx page and all these things out here as such. So any questions still here, guys? Anyone, any questions still here that I can take? Anyone, any questions I can take till you? Okay, so the question here is that can I go ahead and run multiple containers on the same host? Because the advantage of Docker is that, as I discussed, you don't need multiple, let's say, virtual machines to go ahead and let's say run something. All I need is let's say one single virtual machine, and on the same host, I can go ahead and let's say run multiple Docker containers, not one, not two, but multiple Docker containers. I can do that. I have a capability to go ahead and do this to let's say run multiple Docker containers literally on the same host out here. So what I'll do is that for the first container, I said it is Nginx container. This is running. The second container, let me go to hub.docker.com once again. This is where I will get all my images, all the publicly available images, and I'll search for an image called HTTPD. There is an image called HTTPD again. It's an it's a server again. It's just like the Nginx that you had. It's just a server with a simple HTML page. It's a very simple HTML page out here. So it's saying what is HTTPD server? It's nothing but an Apache web server out here. How to use this image? They're telling okay, fine, you should go ahead and let's say use this image in this way. So I'm good with that. So I'll just go here. I'll firstly go ahead and pull that particular image. How do I pull that image? By using this command called docker pull. And since I'm inside the virtual machine, I'll say sudo docker pull. Again, since the copy paste doesn't work, I'll have to do a right click and let me remove this. Sudo docker pull the HTTPD and I'm pulling this particular image inside. So now I'm pulling the second image. And now if you see, I have two images. So images. So if I say sudo docker images, I have two images that are there. One is the Nginx image. The other is the HTTPD image. Both are part of the same host. Now what I want to do is that I want to run this image. I want to expose this particular image also to the internet. So what I'll do is that I'll say sudo docker run the same command. I will say HTTP container, something like this. I'll say hyphen D hyphen P again 8080 and again say the name of the image, which is HTTPD. And I'll say enter. And do you all see or can you all tell me if the container is now running, guys? How do I check whether the container is running or not? How do I check whether the container is running? Guys, it's just becoming a one-way traffic
Status,
right now. Sorry, how do I
uh,
check this? Sorry.
Docker status.
Docker status. How do I check whether containers are running in the background or not? That was the question. So let's do Docker status. Status is not a Docker command at all. So how do I check whether the containers are running in the background or not? Or how do I just check whether what are the containers that are running in the background? What is the command, guys? Guys, I do not want to waste time. So very importantly, it has to be a two-way traffic. I cannot just go ahead and let's say teach to the walls. I need some inputs from your end. If you're not understanding, please let me know. If you're not understanding, I'll make sure that I'll explain that once again. But can anyone tell me what is the command to go ahead and check or to go ahead and check what are the containers that are running in the background? And can anyone tell me, can you read the error here? And can you understand what exactly is the error here? When I'm trying to run a different container, what is the error that I'm getting? Can anyone read what is there on my screen?
What is already allocated?
Port is already allocated. And to which container is the port is allocated? How do I know what is the container that is running in the background? What is the command to go ahead and let's say check the containers that are running in the background? We just executed it a couple of minutes ago, right?
Docker list.
Dockerlist, did we run a command since this morning called Dockerlist? So it means that no one is actually practicing this out. Again, guys, see, there is nothing that I'll gain out of it. It is you who is going to, let's say, go ahead and work with these particular technologies out here. So if you do not know the basic commands, it'll become very difficult for you to even give the interviews out here. So again, see, I don't mind explaining it once again, but I want some inputs from your end to tell me whether you are practicing this or not, or if you're not practicing, what is the issue? So can anyone, I mean, I have already given the documentation links to you all, right? Can you all go to that link and tell me what is the command to, let's say, see the containers out here? Can't you all not do that? Guys, I need some inputs here. I cannot be moving forward without that. I am sorry to say, but if I don't get inputs, I have to close the session. I won't be able to take the session going forward out here. So can anyone tell me what is the command to just go ahead and, let's say, look at the containers that are running in the background?
Docker exec.
What would that do? What would that command really do out there?
We'll be looking into that container.
I don't want to look into the container. I want to just see what are all the containers that are running in the background. I don't want to, let's say, look into the container. That's something that I can do later. But I just want to see what are all the containers that are running in my host. Did we execute any command today since this morning, guys, to see what are the containers that are running? Did we? Yes, no.
Yes, I mean first we have use list of the Docker
Hmm.
list.
Yes, okay. So let's do this. Let's understand once again. Let's take one step back. What is the command that we have executed to check the images that are there in our host? What is the command we use to go ahead and, let's say, just check what are all the images
Pseudo
out here?
Docker container list.
So Docker container list.
Docker image
So sorry, Docker
image
Pseudo
list.
con yeah, yeah.
image list. So sudo
Just leave.
Docker
Pseudo Docker
image
container list.
ls.
list list. This gives you the list of images out here. So then, what is the command to see the containers that are running in the background?
Docker PS.
Docker ps, exactly. Sudo Docker ps will give you the containers that are actually running in the background. And which container is running right now? What is the name of this particular container? Can anyone tell me that?
Test container.
Test container, exactly. It's test container, which is running out of a source image called nginx. This is the source image on which this particular container is running. I created this about 12 minutes ago. And can anyone tell me which port this is running on? Which port this container is running on?
80.
80? 80 of what? 80 of the
TCP.
host.
Okay.
That's fine. That's a TCP, but it's nothing but a host on which I am running this out, right? Which means that this host port called 80, meaning this is my host. And if I go into the networking, there is a host port called 80 out here that is open and listening to the internet traffic. And this port is already allocated to a container called test container. Now what I'm doing again is that, let's go there. What I'm doing again is that I'm using this command once again, telling sudo docker run. I'm calling a container called http container in the background, and I'm trying to run this container once again on the same host port. I'm trying to allocate the same host port to two different containers. The thumb rule here is that two containers can never share the same port. You can never have two containers running on the same port at all. This is not allowed. this is okay. Container port is okay because each and every container will have its own ports. So I am not going ahead and running the HTTP container with this container port. Each and every container will have its own port out here. So this is not allowed. So that's the reason I am not seeing that container called HTTP, because it's telling error from this particular Docker daemon, meaning error from the Docker engine. It's telling that, okay, fine, this particular port is already allocated. So either deallocate that particular port or allocate a new port to this particular container. Again, if I want to see all the containers that are stopped and that are also running, then what is the command, guys? So to see all the containers, it is sudo docker ps, and to see all the containers that are there in the background, which are not also running, then what exactly is the command here? What should I do here with this particular command? Should I add anything here?
Yeah, Docker ps -a.
I'm gonna say exactly docker ps -a. So if I do a docker ps -a,
Yeah, sir.
I would also see that particular container that got created, which is not, let's say, running. So what I'll do is that this container is stale. I'll firstly remove this container. So to remove this container, I'll run a command called sudo docker rm remove space the name of the container or the ID of the container. So the name or the ID, anything is okay. And as and when I do an enter, I have that container removed. So in the background, if I just go ahead and let's say run this command once again, I have only the Nginx container which is up and running, let's say, since the last 15 minutes. What I'll do is I'll run the command once again, telling sudo docker, let's say, run, but this time I'll change the host port. Instead of putting 80, I'll say 8080. I'm opening up a new port on the host, or I'm rather telling that please listen to this particular port on the host called 8080. Colon 80 is okay, and the second 80 is okay because this is a port for the container out here. I'll say enter, and once I enter this out, now I do not get an error. And if I do a sudo docker ps, I see that there is a HTTP container running. There is a test container which is also running. Both the containers running on the same host out here. So two different containers having two different IDs running on the same host. Now what I need to do is that here I do not have the port 8080 open on the infrastructure layer. I'll add a rule on the host telling that please open up this particular port called 8080. Allow this particular traffic. I'll say add. So I'm creating a particular rule here, telling please allow this particular port 8080 on this particular host out here. And once this rule is added, it will take like about a minute or so for the rule to come into picture. So now what I'm doing is that if I just refresh this out, yes, I have allowed this particular container to run, but this virtual machine is not actively listening on that particular port. It doesn't virtually have this port. Now I went ahead, open this port out, and now I can take the public IP of this machine, go to an incognito window, colon, I'll say this IP colon 8080. If I don't give this 8080, it'll give me welcome to Nginx because by default, these IPs listen to port 80 out here, the internet traffic. I'll put this IP, I'll say 8080. And now I have a different, let's say, output that is coming around telling it works. This is the output, what my HTTPD container is giving me. My HTTPD container is now in return giving me this particular, let's say, value, telling that this particular, let's say, port is running, this is open, and the content is coming from this particular HTTPD container out here as such. So there are two containers that are running, or two applications that are running on the same host. One being your Nginx, the Nginx server, the other being the HTTP server out here, and both are running in a coexistence way. So one is, let's say, working on an 8080 port, the other is working on a port 80 out here as such. Yes, any questions till here? Anyone, any questions that I can take till here? Anyone, any questions that I can take till here? Or anyone who's not following, anyone who needs a re-explanation of it, please let me know. I'll also be I'll also be able to do that. So if I want to now stop just one application, let's say I want to stop the HTTP container, I don't want this application, I can say sudo docker stop. And if I say enter, this particular container is now stopped. And if I just refresh the screen, it will try to go into that port 8080 of this particular virtual machine. The virtual machine will try to divert the traffic. There's no container. So by default, it'll, let's say, refuse all the connections, but this will still work. Reason being, this container is still alive. It's not down yet. This container is still alive. I do not stop this container. It's still running in the background, listening to my traffic out here, actively out here as such. Yes, any questions, guys? Anyone, any questions still here? Anyone, any questions still here? Again, just a quick recap. Let's very important. Let's look at the commands. In order to make sure to list all the images, it's Docker images or Docker image ls list or list list. Anything is okay. But easier shortcut is Docker images to go ahead and get all the, let's say, images that are running in the background. Then if you want to, let's say, look at the containers, it is Docker ps, or you'll say Docker container list or ls is okay. If you want to stop a container, it's Docker, or if you want to start run a container first, let's say see how you can run a container. So it's Docker run hyphen name of the container hyphen d detach mode in the background hyphen p the port that you want to, let's say, run this container on, and then the name of the image. That's the command to go ahead and, let's say, run your containers. If you want to stop your container, I'll say Docker stop ID of that particular, let's say, container. And if I want to start the container, I'll say Docker start ID of that particular container that I want to start out here as such. So this is what I have. These are all the commands that I do have that are running in the background. And with these commands, I'm going out and I'm going ahead and, let's say, playing up with, let's say, these containers out here as such. Yes, any questions still here? Any questions with the commands or any questions still here? Anything that you're confused about? Anything till here? Anything as such? Right, so let me start the container back again. So I'll say sudo docker start and space the ID of the container. So it's something like OC, or sorry, 0C0, something like this, 7. So even the first 2 3 digits will, still work. So if I go back here, again, I have this particular, let's say, content telling me that, what it works and all these things out here as such. Now, again, these are all default images. It's all defaults, meaning someone has put this particular HTML page inside this particular container. This is not me. I did not go ahead and, let's say, design this particular HTML page. Not at all. Someone has done that. I'm just using this particular, let's say, content, or I'm just using, let's say, this particular container. I'm just using their own HTML pages out here as such. What if you are a developer and you have your own HTML code, and you want to make sure that you get this particular HTML code in written instead of the default, you want a custom page. Instead of the default, you want your own custom code to come in, meaning I want to replace this particular content that is running inside Nginx. So I don't want to use Nginx. I mean, Nginx also knows that they are just giving you a platform to expose your applications to the internet, but they know that you want to change this particular HTML page. You don't want this particular HTML page. This is a default HTML page out here. So if you go into the documentation again and just type in Nginx, you have the Nginx image, And if I just scroll down to the Nginx image, it is going to tell you what is Nginx. It's telling Nginx. The pronunciation is this one. It's a HTTP reverse proxy server. They're telling all this is okay. How do you run this? And how do you use this? They're telling you can use something called as a Docker file to generate a new image that includes the necessary content, which is much cleaner solution than to bind the above or something. Meaning they're telling, you know what, all the content which you see here on this particular screen is placed inside a folder, or it's rather running inside a folder. Again, see, when you are, let's say, looking at an IIS, right, you have a folder called root. Inside that particular folder, you have a folder called, sorry, you have a folder called site. Inside that particular folder, you have a folder called www root, inside which you have your HTML pages. So whatever is the HTML page that you're running here, whatever is the content that you're running here, this is exposed to the internet. In the same way, when you're talking about Nginx, all the content of Nginx is there in a folder called user share Nginx, and inside that you have something called HTML. So you have a folder called user. Inside that you have a folder called share. Inside that you have something called Nginx. Inside that you have a folder called HTML. Inside that particular folder called HTML, you'll have your all default HTML pages, which is this one. So if you want to just see that, and how do I know this? Again, going back into the documentation, this is what they're telling. They're just telling, you know what, all the content is put here. User share Nginx and all these things. So they're just telling this is where I have all the content. And if you want to replace the existing content with your own content, then these are the commands to do that. It's telling from this particular image. So you have two things. This is very important. This statement is very important, which is called from. It's telling from I need to declare a base image. So I'm telling please go ahead to this particular Nginx. This is your source. Download that particular image. My Docker will say yes, that image is already there. Next, tell me what do I do. I'm giving one more command to Docker, telling Docker that please copy some folder. Here it is static HTML directory. I can have any folder telling HTML, my HTML, whatever it is, into this particular path. So I'm telling whatever is there in that particular path, erase it out. Please copy my own folder. And I am passing these instructions to my Docker on the VM in the form of something called as a Docker file. And this is what Docker file is actually used for, in order to pass instructions to your Docker engine or to the Docker software out here. And what are the instructions? These are the instructions, whatever that you see inside that particular file. Let's say you want to install a Google Chrome browser. Let's say you want to install .NET, something like that. All these instructions can be given to your Docker engine uh, by packing all those instructions together into something known as a Docker file out here. And again, the naming convention is very important. D caps, everything else small. It's a Docker file. No spaces, nothing. Just a Docker file out here. So firstly, what I'll do, I'll just go into my browser. I'll just get some sample HTML pages. So I'll say download some sample HTML templates. Some random HTML templates. I'll go back into the particular css.com and let's see. So this is a HTML. It's in the healthy way of life company and all that stuff. So I'll just go ahead and download this out. It's a HTML5. So I'll download this out. So I get some files here, some random files here. And if I go into my download section, I have this particular folder downloaded. I'll just go ahead and extract this out. And here I have some HTML. So I have a folder called HTML. inside which I have all the images, all the, let's say, JS sources for my application to run. I'll just make a copy of this one. I'm just copying it, going into the junk folder. I'll just make a new folder called Docker contents, something like this. And firstly, place this particular HTML full directory. You can call this anything. You can say my folder, something like this, inside which I have all my contents. So all these contents are there. Now what I'm going to do is I'll just open up a notepad and I'll say give a command called from. So I'm telling from nginx latest, meaning this is the source image. Again, it supports commenting, so I'm putting a comment here telling the source image. Please copy or copy. Always better to give it in all caps. My folder, which is this particular directory, into that path which I see inside the Nginx official documentation. Please copy all the contents inside this particular path and I'll say save. I'll save it in the same folder again. So I'll go into that particular, let's say, Docker contents. And very importantly, guys, please observe while I'm saving this out, I'll click here. I'll say all files and in quotes, open and close. I'm telling it is a Docker D capital file. So what happens with this is that if you go back into the directory, it goes ahead and saves this out, not as a text document. Very importantly, this is very important to do. It's not a text document, it's a Docker file without any extension. So it's a file. So if you look at, let's say, text documents, right? They would end with something called .txt. I don't need that. I want us to save this as something called as a Docker file out here. So I got a Docker file. And if you look at the Docker file again, I can open this with VS Code. I can do that. So if I just open this with VS Code, again, it's able to recognize that this is a Docker file. And you can remove this. I don't need this actually. And it's telling from Nginx latest. It is telling this is the folder that I want to copy into this particular path where I want to copy this out. So it's telling two commands, from and then copy, and it's telling what is the source of the image, where do you want to copy your folder. So I have this in place. Now what I'll do is that this is the entire folder called Docker contents, right? I want to transfer this entire folder into my virtual machine. So my virtual machine is running and I need this particular folder onto this particular virtual machine so that I can start my journey. So in order to do that, what I'll do is I'll again use something called as WinSCP. This is a tool that we used earlier. It's an FTP tool. It's a file transfer protocol mechanism tool. And it's telling what kind of a session you want. I need an SCP session. It's asking me what is the host name. So I'll go back, get the public IP address of the VM, place it here. It's asking me the username. I'll give the username of the VM along with the password. And what I'm doing is that yes, I'll say yes, this connection is authenticated. And I'm starting a session with that particular virtual machine and I'm starting an FTP session. So I'm telling, okay, fine, please go ahead, start an FTP session. And now it's telling, yes, you are in this particular directory called test user. What do you want to transfer? So again, I'll just get the path of this particular directory. So I'll just copy this entire path. I'll go here. I'll say browse. I'll say okay. And the folder was called something like Docker content, right? So I'll just scroll down, and this is the folder just called Docker content. I'll just drag and drop this out into my virtual machine. So I'm just dragging and dropping all that particular, let's say, Docker content inside my virtual machine. So it will take about a minute or so to transfer this out. And once everything is transferred, meaning all my HTML, all my CSS files, once they are transferred, I will start creating my own image. This is what I'm doing right now. Is I am creating an image. Until now, I've been using the images that are there on the internet. I'm just going into, let's say, Docker Hub. I'm saying hub.docker.com, and I'm just calling that particular image. Now I don't want to do that. I want to start creating my own image right now. And if I want to create my own image, this is what I need. I need a source code, and the source here is the HTML code that I am using. And I need a file that can instruct my Docker engine, which is called as a Docker file. So I'm just telling from that particular Docker file, I'm telling please go from that particular source image called Nginx, download it if not available, copy my folder, which is nothing but the source code out here, into this particular path, which is that user share Nginx and HTML. Just copy this out into that particular path out here as such. This is what I am instructing, or this is what I'm rather telling my Docker engine to do. And not to tell that I need the contents, so I have the contents. So I'll come back here, and what I'll do is that I'll just clear the screen, and I'll say ls list, meaning it'll just list all the directories that are there inside my virtual machine, and I have a directory called Docker contents. So I'll do a cd into it, change directory, and I'll say Docker contents. So I'm inside that particular folder called Docker contents. Now do an ls. I have my Docker file and I have my folder. If you just want to read the Docker file from within the virtual machine, right? Just type a command called cat and then say Docker file. Cat here is like the get content in PowerShell, equivalent of the same. And here you have two lines here telling which is from that particular image, copy my folder into this particular path. That's it. And now what I'm going to do is, since I have the Docker file and since I have my folder out here, now I'll begin with the image creation process. Again, the image creation is also a command which is called sudo docker build my own image, hyphen t, meaning tag or name of my image. I'll say my custom image, something like this. I'll say space and I'll say dot, meaning in this folder. When I say dot, in this folder, please go ahead and find something called as a Docker file, take the instructions from it and go ahead and build an image. It's called as a Docker context, and I'll say enter. As and when I did an enter, it's telling okay fine, sending the build context to the Docker daemon. So it's telling okay fine, I'm asking the Docker daemon, or I'm asking the Docker engine underneath to build your image, and it's telling okay fine, here I found your Docker file and I see two instructions which is telling from Nginx latest, which I already have. I've downloaded that particular image earlier. Now it's saying okay fine, copy that particular my folder into this particular, let's say, path called user share nginx html, into this particular path, and give me an image with the name called my custom image. Now if I say sudo docker images to check all the images that I have, these two images is something that I downloaded. I did not create this out. This image is something that I just created 42 seconds ago from a base image called Nginx. So add a base image on top of which I went ahead and created this one image called my custom image out here. And now what I'm going to do, so it's just sudo docker run. I want to run a container out of this particular image. I'll say custom container, say -p, expose the port or run this particular, let's say, image. 80 is occupied, 8080 is occupied. I'll say 90, something like this. Some port called 90 or 9090. And the container port called 80 out here. Run this in the background, space the name of the image. So this port will always keep changing, because as and when I allocate a port to a particular container, that port is consumed, that port is exposed. So I'll say enter. So now it's telling okay fine, it is running. Now as a part of this particular exposure, I'll again come here, go into the networking. I'll say add a port, add a rule, inbound rule. I'll just go here. I'll say 9090. This is the port that I need to expose. I'll say add. So I'm adding a rule called 1990 out here. So this is what I'm doing. I expose this out using this particular, let's say, run command. The name I've given some name, or custom container is what I gave here. And I expose this out telling it is 1990 colon 80 and the name of the image, whichever image that you have created out here. And once you have the port exposed, let's try this out once again. So I have in the background. So here at a port called 80, I have the Nginx that is running. At a port called 8080, I have the HTTPD that is running. Now at a port called 9090, I don't want the HTTP here because it will hit the port 80 now. At a port called 9090, which is colon 9090 out here, I have my own custom container which is running. So it will take some time for that particular container to come up because this is the first time that I'm booting this out. And this is my own custom container, which is my own HTML image. And this HTML image is now running out of this. And I have, some random, let's say, HTML pages that is there, healthy way of life or something like that. So they're about classes, events, and all that stuff. So again, if I had my own content, I could have ran my own content out of it, and I could have, let's say, designed this out. Let's say if you do contact us, I could have put my own, let's say, image map. I could have given my own, let's say, contact number and all that stuff out here as such. So this is how I am running a custom image, or I've created a custom image by using this simple command called Pseudo Docker build. I just did a build. I'm building my own image. I'm telling this is my custom image. I'm putting a dot, a build context out here. And I'm telling, okay, fine, these are all the commands. And I'm, let's say, going ahead and creating my own image out here. And I'm running this particular image out of a Docker host. So I have a Docker host, which is my own virtual machine. I'm running this image from that particular virtual machine out here. And I'm able to access this content over the internet. So over the internet, I'm able to access the entire HTML page out here as such. Yes, any questions still here? Anyone? Any questions still here? Again, until unless we don't practice this out, guys, on a daily basis, it will not help us out. I want you all to try this out. I want you all to practice this out. The future going forward is all about Dockers and Kubernetes. Believe me, a lot of companies are implementing these practices. It's very important that we know from the scratch, we know from the basic on how this really works out. Yes, anyone, any questions here? Anyone, any questions that I can take? All right, thank you and have a good day ahead, guys. Thank you.